Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, what is going on, Colts Nation? So GM Chris Ballard had his end-of-the-year presser earlier today, and Cody and Derek joining you. Derek, obviously, not from his normal studio, but wanted to join anyway and kind of give our thoughts here on this Ballard presser. Now, obviously, Derek, I was able to do it live stream, so I was able to watch all the way through. I'm not sure if – I know you said you watched part of it, but a lot of it stuff there from Chris Ballard when it came to just overall this team, his philosophy, and some interesting comments that he made. So I figured we could just kind of start right into it. And, obviously the first question that was asked was probably the biggest question that people have, or one of the biggest questions, was all obviously about the young quarterback, Anthony Richardson. And, he was asked about, what does Richardson need to work on? And Chris Ballard said the number one thing is staying healthy. He said now we're going on 2 seasons in a row where he has missed time. So what are your thoughts there first on kind of Ballard's comments on the biggest thing for AR? I think a thing that we've been saying is he hasn't been healthy for, a full season in his first 2 years as the Indianapolis Colts quarterback. So what were your thoughts there on Ballard kind of talking about AR and the need to stay healthy as that starting quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of interesting things that Ballard was saying today. I'm sure we're going to get into it. And obviously, I will say right off the bat that this was definitely a different sounding Chris Ballard than I expected. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a second. But as far as the quarterback comments, yeah, I mean, he's echoing what everybody else has been saying. Like, Anthony Richardson has shown his inability to remain healthy. And, we got to bring in somebody that's going to compete. Now, I'm very much interested, Cody, on if that actually is going to happen. Like, none of these, old retread quarterbacks that, are on their way out of the last season. Are you going to actually bring in a young kid that's actually going to fight for a chance to win the starting spot? And are they going to actually start this other competing guy? Because if that's the case, because Cody, I kind of brought it up on the live stream the other day that it doesn't make much sense for me to be able to, start a competing piece, because if you are, then you're basically pointing out to everyone that you were wrong about Anthony Richardson actually being able to hold down the job. And that pretty much just proves that Chris Ballard made the wrong move at quarterback. And that means that, it's time to move on from Chris Ballard. But that's a topic we can talk about at another time. But yes, competition, not only at every other position, but at the quarterback as well, is super important, because you're right. We questioned Anthony Richardson's maturity and his willingness and ability to be able to handle everything else that's going on. Maybe Steichen and Ballard have finally wised up. Maybe they've done enough to say, hey, we're going to set a different standard here now. Hopefully that's the case.
Yeah, and you alluded to it. Chris Ballard said we need some more competition in the quarterback position, which definitely, Derek, to me signals that, not that the Colts are, giving up on Anthony Richardson, but they very much see, number one, he has not been able to stay healthy. And number two, he needs a guy that's going to push him to be better. Not a 40-year-old quarterback that clearly is brought in as the backup. No, a guy that could seriously compete with him in training camp and potentially win the job. Right? Because, he even alluded to it with, the A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce thing, how it made Alec Pierce better, right? And it's the same is true for every part of your roster, especially the quarterback position. And, Ballard was talking about the idea when it came to, Anthony Richardson last year. He said that, he was drowning. He said, the game was too fast for him at that point, and he needed to take a step back. So, Derek, and obviously he raved about, when he came back, but it is a real thing. Like Anthony Richardson, this is I think we've said it, right? They're kind of all tied together. So if you're going to get the best out of Anthony Richardson, you need to give him legitimate competition that will push him and that will hold him accountable. And when obviously, Derek, when inevitably, if he does miss some more games, you have a legitimate quarterback that can actually do something. Joe Flacco was okay for the Colts, but again, he's a 40-year-old quarterback. He's not going to be a part of your future. So you think of a guy like a Justin Fields. That's kind of the big popular name, right? Like bring in a quarterback that could seriously force Anthony Richardson to not be the starter next year. Like legitimately could. Now, maybe Anthony Richardson rises to the occasion, and if so, that's great. But if not, you can't. It'd be foolish in my mind, Derek, to rely on Anthony Richardson at this point to play in 17 games, right?
Yeah.
So you need another quarterback that has been durable. I think Justin Fields has been durable the last couple of years, and a quarterback that can come in and not just keep you afloat, but potentially could be that guy moving forward. And we've said this all along, right? If neither of these guys prove to be, whoever the quarterback you bring in and AR, then you start over at quarterback next year, probably with a new GM, probably with a new head coach. It's Jim Irsay, so who knows? But yeah, I thought that was definitely interesting when talking about Anthony Richardson and what Chris Ballard, said with the competition. It definitely seems like the Colts will bring in some legitimate competition, which is something they have not done in the 2 years for Anthony Richardson. It's always been a guy that clearly has been slated to be the backup. So yeah, that was definitely interesting there when it came to it. Also, Chris Ballard said something that, as much as I called a lot of BS on what Ballard said, I did appreciate when he did not try to sell the fans on we've heard it the last couple of years. We're that close, right? We're close. Chris Ballard was very candid today, Derek. He said, we were an 8-9 football team. We were not close at all last year. And that was kind of a refreshing take from Ballard because we've just heard, and I just almost thought, he's almost like slated to say something like that because we've heard it for how many years now that we're not that far away. BS. And I was like, he's just going to make the fans angrier.
Yeah.
So at least from that standpoint, I appreciated the candidness of Chris Ballard to say, number one, we were not close. And number two, running it back like we did last year, he called it a mistake, Derek. He called it a mistake. And he said, we need to add competition. So I was like, that's exactly what we've been saying, man.
Literally. Yeah. That's what we've been saying this whole time. And you know what? And you're right. I'm glad that he actually said the right things. He said the right things in that clearly, it was a mistake to do what we did. I thought that we were going to be able to ride the tidal wave of 2023 and take that into 2024. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I was wrong there. And insinuating that we're close, we're not that close. I mean, obviously, Steichen said it a few weeks ago. Steichen's just trying to stand up for his team. That is what it is. But yeah, it feels like the first time in years, Cody, that Ballard has sat there and said something that all of us universally agree with him on, that, hey, you're not actually that close. The guys that you have in this group right now, they're not good enough. You're not good enough. They're not good enough. And I'm glad that you're actually understanding it. And, he mentioned Defoe a bunch of times early in that presser, about the comments that DeForest Buckner made. And, he's right. And that the egos and the complacency and all those other things said, yeah, that's on me because I thought that these guys would be hungrier if I rewarded them for being Indianapolis Colts, doing their jobs, all this stuff. And I thought that they would, move along with it. But obviously they haven't. And, that's great recognition. And I'm glad that, I do think that there's been enough outside noise, Cody, from people like us, regular fans, people within the building, all those different things where Ballard is forced to say, yeah, this isn't going the way that I wanted it to go. So, yeah, it was definitely refreshing to hear those words from Ballard.
I thought it was interesting. He referenced like the bringing back your own guys, right? Because that's what the Colts did. I mean, the two outside free agents they had were a 40-year-old quarterback and a backup defensive tackle. And that was it, right? So, it kind of like led me to think, okay, who is he like actually talking about here? Because you think about the guys the Colts brought back, right? Michael Pittman, which I don't think anybody questions Pittman's, his determination. He played through that fractured back like, he's a dog. Like, we absolutely appreciate Michael Pittman. I don't think he's a part of the issue at all when it comes to the culture. You re-signed Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, those type of guys, which I don't get the sense, unless I'm completely missing it, those guys don't strike me as guys who wouldn't put in the work,
Right.
So it kind of leads you to think, like, who would it be? And I think the only two guys in my mind, Derek, and I could be missing a guy or two, would be two of your defensive players, would be Zaire Franklin and also would be Julian Blackman. Those
Are
are the
you
two guys.
referring to? Are you referring to him about the anonymous quote thing, or
No, he talked about like bringing the guys back, like you just mentioned. Like I thought that they would hold the standard, and they'd have that kind of
Mhm.
fire from last year, but
Yeah,
it didn't work out that way. So I'm kind of like thinking, who out of the guys they re-signed that he's talking about? He didn't name names, obviously, but who would that be, right?
right.
And I
Yeah,
can only
I
come
have
up with
no, I have no clue. And I think that, but I think we as fans that try to be objective and have watched all the games and see everything else that's going on. You're right. Like, I don't think you could put Kenny Moore in that issue either because Kenny has been one of the few guys that's been very vocal about the fact
no doubt.
that the standard hasn't been upheld. And I don't think it's really been much of an offensive guy thing because, your offensive leaders, most of the guys on that offensive side, your leaders at least, have, been, have been praised by guys in the locker room and things like that. But I think you're right. Guys like Zaire and Julian, the guys that were extended or re-signed this offseason, and maybe and a lot of things weren't going the right way. I know Julian was hurt for a good chunk of this year,
True.
but at the end of the day, the play, the level of play definitely went down. And Pittman obviously had his issues with it too this year, but Pittman came back and he came back strong. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's ever been a point where Blackman or Franklin ever did that either. And I know we've had our issues with what Franklin has been like this year. But yeah, that is it leads me to think, Cody, that there might actually be a shift in some guys who won't be here. I think a lot of fans who want some of these players back, I don't think are going to get some of these players back, or guys might get cut. I think it might
Yeah.
not be so surprising.
Well, yeah, I mean, you potentially are going a whole different type of scheme. I mean, Ballard did not really commit either way. I think he still would prefer a 4-man front, but he did again say Shane Steichen is making that decision, Derek, and he'll be a part of that process. But it's Shane Steichen's decision ultimately, which leads me to ask the question. Oh, I'm glad they're doing it now, but why didn't they do this 2 years ago? Why
Right.
did they continue with Gus Bradley, who clearly was philosophically different than what Shane Steichen? I mean,
I
based
will
off of
say
who they
this.
already interviewed.
I will
You
say
know?
this. You try to do due diligence with people. Again, it is livelihoods. You don't want to reshuffle everything in a coaching scheme if you don't have to. Especially since Shane is not a defensive minded person.
Sure.
So maybe that's one of those situations where it's like, hey, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt here because let's face it for one thing, Cody. Gus Bradley's defense in 2022 was okay. It was an okay
Yeah.
defense.
It was
That
clearly
year,
better than the
when we
offense.
were so bad, the only good thing you could resemble from that year was the Indianapolis Colts defense because they would have been a top 10 fringe defense had we had an offense that was actually playing any kind of resemblance of good football. And so we gave Gus Bradley the benefit of the doubt. And then obviously these last 2 years with Shane Steichen, the defenses have continued to get worse and worse and worse. So, that just 2 cents in it for that one. As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Now, what is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well.
You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance. So your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I definitely didn't mind when they gave him that first year with Steichen, but I was kind of puzzled why they brought him back for a year or two, really after the defense kind of crumbled again, and was a big reason why. I mean, in a lot of ways, Derek, why you didn't make the playoffs in a couple of those games in 2023. And obviously we saw 2024 defense had a lot of issues too. And what's the difference between winning 8 games and 10 games? Honestly, you think about even 2 of those games, Derek, when your offense, gave you the lead and your defense gave it up, right?
Yep.
Or your offense kept you in it. There was multiple games like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who Shane obviously does bring in. But Ballard did talk about going back to Zaire Franklin. He said he had this quote. He was asked about the podcast. He said, "You can't win with distractions," which was interesting to me. So does that mean that I guess I have 2 questions. Does that mean that, number one, Zaire Franklin, they sat him down, said, "Dude, do not do the podcast during the year, during the actual season"? Or number 2, like you said, could there be legitimate changes that maybe we're not 100% convinced are going to happen, but could be more realistic? Like, could you have shipped him out? For example, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't necessarily believe that will, but who knows?
It's funny because that is where my mind went to as well. Was like, is there a deeper meaning behind those words? Like, you can't win with distractions, because he didn't say that the podcast was a distraction. He just said that you can't win with distractions. And you said it on there that Zaire has been a distraction this year. For especially at the end of this year too, again, making it all about himself, talking about his Pro Bowl, his beef with Pat McAfee, and his podcast. He got roasted for talking crap about the Giants, only to get destroyed by them. And obviously the situation in the last game of the year where he did that, like with Pat McAfee's, shaking air. Again, it has been a distraction. Zaire Franklin's been a major disruption and distraction to this Indianapolis Colts team at the very end of the year. And I gotta imagine that, Chris Ballard's probably got to feel a little pissed about it. I got to imagine behind closed doors. Nobody will say it out loud right now, but I got to imagine the guys in the locker room and other things like that. Dude, your 173 tackles don't mean nothing to anyone. At the fact that we just lost it, we went 8-9, and you're on Twitter half the time arguing with people about your Pro Bowl, and the fact that you led the league in tackles, like it's you. Like that was a great point. And I think that it is you and I mentioned it several times last week that, listen, if you're going to do a podcast and you're in the entertainment industry like they are, and sound bites come back to bite you so much. Like Cody, you and I get roasted every once in a while on Twitter for things that we say, but
And that's
they're in the
fine.
spotlight for millions of people to watch.
Yeah.
And when you say something like what you said about the Giants and a bunch of other things throughout the year, it comes back and it bites you in the ass, dude. And like, it's like if you can't watch what you say and you can't back up what you say on your podcast, then it's best to just not do it. Honestly, it's just best to not do it.
And I think you even said, and we'll get off the Zaire Franklin thing because we've talked about it a lot, but you said it. I mean, as a captain, it does not just affect you, it affects the entire team. I mean, it comes back on the entire team at the end of the day, like it or not. That's just part of it. So that was interesting that Ballard talked about that. And again, with a new DC, also, by the way, he didn't say this in here, but the Indianapolis Colts are not going to be retaining their linebacker and DB coach.
Yeah, I saw that.
So within that, obviously some new staff, and he kind of said the new DC will determine some of those things. So we'll have to see on defensive line coach and some of the other things as well, some of the assistant coaches and stuff like that. But I wanted to kind of go back real fast, Derek, to bringing back your own guys and what kind of happens there. And Chris Ballard kind of talking about the lack of fresh blood in there, the lack of fresh guys that would bring that healthy tension, that would bring that competition. And, he took the blame on that. He fell on the sword when it came to that. He said it was a miscalculation to not bring in more outside free agents. And again, Derek, for me, it's like, dude, how are we in year 9 and you're finally saying this? But I guess I'm like, I like the wording. Like, I think I liked a lot of the stuff that Chris Ballard said today about bringing in outside free agents. But again, Derek, he's had 8 years. He hasn't done it really at all. Like, he's done a little bit. And of course, he couldn't help himself. He had to refer back to previous off seasons and crap like that. But I'm just kind of sitting here and I'm like, I'm hopeful, but I'm not expecting anything to change when it comes to Chris Ballard. But from what he said, it does appear like he is less comfortable than he was a year ago. And he feels more of a sense of urgency to win now, which I think makes a lot of people to believe that, I mean, he should have been gone. We agree. But his seat has to be red hot at this point.
Red hot.
He does not seem like a GM that's comfortable like he was a year ago.
No, he does not look like it. And, Irsay's words, fix it. It's not about all chips in right now. It's fix it. It means you messed up. Your team stinks. Fix it. So, hey, we're giving you the chance to fix it here, dude. You messed up. Go fix it. So, you're right. Like, Ballard being on the extreme hot seat and the owner's words saying you need to fix what you put here, like maybe that is the motivation to Chris Ballard, doing more. Now, I think you and I should continue to do some videos on, like what kind of move specifically that will be. That'll be for a future video. I don't know if a lot of I doubt we'll be able to get a ton of top free agents in here, but it would be a very wise idea for Ballard to keep getting some of those B tier level guys to come in and compete for these jobs, because you're right. The complacency is the issue, and it's going to continue to be unless you change your philosophy. Now, that comes to the other part, Cody, and it's what you said multiple times through the presser, multiple times on Twitter, and what everybody else is saying on Twitter too. You say all these things. We agree with you. But the problem is, it is about to be year 9. You haven't shown a lot of change yet. Can we actually see you change it before we actually sit here and say, oh, Chris Ballard is actually changing his approach and actually means what he's saying, and that it was wrong of me to assume that this group was well put together enough to win. I have to change how I do things. I have to bring in more people. I have to he declined to say that he was going to change how he drafts, because he's still stuck with his, we drafted pretty well over the span of the last few years. I doubt much will change there. But as far as free agency approach goes, I mean, Cody, I feel like he has to. I feel like if he's not aggressive and he doesn't make moves happen, whether or not he tried or not, That's the difference, though. Like,
Yeah.
we don't care if you overspend, dude. Like, we don't care. We need to see that you're committed to making these changes. And if you don't make those changes, even if that means spending more than what you're comfortable with, then there's no point in this conversation. You've shown that you haven't been willing to change.
Right. And it's very obvious, Derek, the Colts needed an infusion of talent, right? They need, and Chris Ballard had even talked about when talking about personnel, right? He said we got to be better at pretty much the entire secondary. He said we got to be better, which leads me to believe, okay, if you truly want to be better, there are going to be some free agents that have become available. Feels like there's every year there are some pretty good DBs that do become available. And I've just felt like, Derek, for the last couple of years when the Colts took this go young approach, I just really felt like they've lacked that true difference maker, that true top 10 player in the secondary. They've had they've had some solid guys. Like they have Jalen Jones. I think Nick Cross is a solid yet flawed player. Julian Blackman, he's been decent in the past, but they don't have a top safety. They don't have a top corner right now. And, the guy that you put all your eggs in your basket, one of those guys was hurt all year, Juju Brents. So when it comes to that, it very clearly to me points that if you are truly adamant about adding actual talent and proven talent at that onto your secondary, then I think you almost have to go the free agency approach. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to go back to the draft again, where you've had so many shots at the dartboard, Derek, and very few hits in the secondary. I mean, when you're coming to drafting right now, whether it's poor play, whether it's injuries, it's been that way for a while. So, maybe it's an approach where, he decides, okay, and again, I'm not holding my breath on this, but okay, we've tried this whole drafting thing when it comes to these guys and haven't had a ton of success yet. So maybe we just need to, because when he's added some guys in free agency in the secondary, he's actually, and they've been older, but they've worked out, right? He's had some guys that have had some solid seasons for Indy. So maybe that's the approach again. I'm not entirely sure. But he also, Derek, mentioned potentially tight end as well, talking about they need, a true playmaker in the middle, which was definitely interesting. And obviously, we saw what Tyler Warren did yesterday, and there's a couple different tight ends that are very good.
I am the Harold Fannin Jr. fan club over here. I might as well just make a Twitter page about it and start getting some people on the board. I will say this. Tyler Warren feels like an Indianapolis Colt. Just the way he looks, the way he plays, very much feels like one of those. I think Harold Fannin Jr. can be just as good, if not better, in some other systems. But yeah, as far as the tight end group goes, you're right. Like it was a multitude of different positions throughout the year that Ballard said, "Hey, I like the guys that we have there, and I think that one of them is going to take a leap somewhere." That's the thing, Cody, is he said, I felt like some guys were going to take some leaps, and that was on me for assuming that in all these different positions, guys were going to immediately jump. In the tight end room, he talked about how he liked the 5 or 6 guys that were in there. None of them stepped up. The corner room and the safety room, outside of Nick Cross and Kenny Moore being the good one, nobody really jumped and took over in the secondary, right?
Yeah,
so like,
all right, but again, he's a 7th round pick.
Like guys were okay, but and guys were good at times, but nobody was a real true difference maker the majority of the time. So yeah, you have to make some changes there.
I wanted to quote Chris Ballard. So he said, really having a receiving talent that other teams can prepare for when talking about the impacting the middle of the field. So, I mean, Derek, he raved about Pitt. He raved about Pierce. Obviously, we know how good Josh Downs is. So that leads me to believe what else is left. It has to be tight end, right? It has to be at this point. So, yeah, man, I am hopeful, but not, necessarily banking on anything.
Okay.
Again, like you said, what choice does he have at this point if he truly cares about his job? So it definitely, though, on the surface, and again, Ballard talks a good talk, but oftentimes his walk has been different than his talk. So we'll have to see. It'll be to be determined. But Derek, I'm kind of interested to see kind of what changes potentially are to come on that defensive side of the ball when it comes to that. So it's going to be kind of wild, I think. Potentially some guys that we're not expecting could be gone. Again, I'm not banking on it, but it could happen. And I guess we'll have to see.
Yep, absolutely. Talk is cheap. Go out there, do the moves that you say you're going to make or need to make, and the Colts fan base will forgive you or not forgive you, depending on that. So go out and do what you need to do.
Absolutely. Well, guys, let us know your thoughts here on Chris Ballard's press conference end of the year. Definitely seems like a different Chris Ballard from 2024 Chris Ballard. But again, talk is cheap. Actions matter. We'll have to see what happens there. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all that good stuff. But again, that'll do it for this one, guys. Thanks so much. And as always, go Colts.